in order to keep track of savings and transactions. And ledger itself can have multiple meanings. The reason I phrase like that is to try to combine the commodity theory of money with the credit theory of money rather than have them kind of speak past each other.
Okay.
And so we often think of money as a physical thing. Whereas in the modern era, it's often a ledger, like something that is just our bank account has a ledger. The banks have a central ledger between them. But in the book, for example, I talk about some informal ledgers. Like people can have small groups and they keep mental track of kind of who owes what. It's often like an easier way to kind of ease around barter is just by having that kind of informal credit system. So whether it's letting nature itself be the ledger, which is what we do when for example, we have gold and silver coins, for example, or having some sort of human construct as the ledger. It's basically whatever's the most saleable thing that humanity's kind of using it. What's unique about the token or natural ledger is that there's no one person or one group that has the full snapshot,
Right.
and yet that still exists. There is an objective number for how many gold coins are in a given region, even though no single person is sure what that number is per se,
Yeah.
but that number still exists. And so as that gets updated by physical possession, that's one way of tracking a ledger. Now it just contrasts with most of the ways we do ledgers,
Yeah.
but that's one of the ways to kind of just unify those two concepts and see why they're not totally different things. They're just kind of different functions of an underlying similar principle.
I see. And it's funny because gold like emerges as money before we're even thinking about keeping lists or using gold as a record-keeping system, right? It's an emergent phenomenon. So it reminded me of Hayek's, by human, what does he say, when it's something spontaneously emerges by human action but not by human design kind of thing. So is money then like
You've got multiple cultures that kind of come to similar conclusions, and they don't even articulate it the same way, and yet it kind of reemerges time and time again. So going back to Nick Szabo's essay, The Shelling Point, and other kind of research at that time, it showed that hunter-gatherers often used jewelry beads as an early form of money.
Yes.
Because it served a lot of similar functions. It was human-intensive labor to make.
Yeah.
So it's scarce. But then unlike other big scarce things like meat or spears or something, it was portable. It was small, dense, and importantly, you could wear it, so you didn't have to have it in your hands. And that set of traits, served as money. And obviously, as we got into gold mining, that became the new sort of ornamental, even more dense and even harder to make.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the natural. They have the highest natural stock-to-flow ratio. They have like the longest durability. The most dense you can kind of get for the most part. And if you go into even rarer things than gold, then you run into liquidity issues. Like, people could technically use meteorites for money, but they're not fungible. They don't have a lot of the traits, even though they're super rare. So it's kind of getting as scarce as you can get before you actually start having issues related to the other metrics of money. And that's why gold is that sweet spot. And the only limitation of gold is, one, it was slow, and two, it wasn't as divisible as people would like it to be. It's hard to make a small enough gold coin that you can make it like an hour of someone's work, or and so that's where silver was common as well. So you'd have that kind of bimetallic. You need silver for anything.
Yeah.
And any cultures that kind of hung on to silver longer than they should have, it got to the thing where people that had gold could debase silver quicker than the other way around.
Right.
It's not as high of a stock to flow. And then over the long run, it even kind of overtook gold because we basically levered the system so much that when we actually dropped gold from the system, instead of the rest of the system fully collapsing, we actually to this day are still using these abstractions because we live in an age where speed actually paper ledgers, but then they're run by humans and they break them. But then the funny thing is, for example, when you see in a developing country, if their currency breaks, usually rather than going to gold, they go to like dollars or something. They dollarize more than goldize. Now they still use gold often for longer term savings, jewelry, or stashed away in some context. But for their actual medium of exchange use, they often fall toward a stronger fiat currency because we live in this age where speed is relevant. The invention of paper over papyrus, then bookbinding, and then the printing press, that basically drastically lowered the cost of encryption. We often think of encryption as a digital thing, but basically you need kind of, in that context, pieces of paper that can't be forged easily. And that's where things, and that are inexpensive. And that's where things like the printing press and paper were actually technologies at the time And those things functionally accelerated the ability to transfer, gold and silver around more safely, more efficiently, more quickly, with some degree of abstraction or other things.
Yeah.
But there was still obviously it's still literally moving at the speed of matter, just a little bit quicker than the speed of matter. What the telegraph did is it just completely blew open the divide where people on two different continents could agree or valley.
I see.
That was kind of inevitable.
I see. What you have a chapter in your book titled A Unified Theory of Money. What is that pointing towards?
That's pointing toward the ledger system, which is basically taking the commodity theory of money, which for the most part I adhere to, but then pointing out that there are these other credit aspects that have been there also since the beginning, since the hunter-gatherer days. And there were books like David Graeber's Debt, the first 5,000 years, where they basically say barter never existed in the sense that we think of it. He actually referenced, there were essays by Alfred Mitchell Eames back in it was 1913 and 1914. He actually talked about those same subjects a while back. And my goal was to kind of take some of those arguments seriously enough to incorporate them in what was needed, and then that also centralized power. Even when you look today, the fun thing about fiat currencies is it's basically, globally, it would look like a barter system. There's like 180 currencies.
Yeah.
They work within their country.
Right.
Sometimes I even bring around currency with me, like Egyptian pounds or Norwegian kroner, and point out that this is basically not even money here.
Yeah.
If I wanted to find someone to accept it for good services, it'd actually be kind of like uniquely hard.
Yes.
Even though these are ubiquitous monies in their place of origin.
Right.
And that's why even on the global scale with fiat currencies, they all tie into the top biggest one or two currencies in the world. For the most part, the dollar, to avoid that problem. And so it applies both to commodity money and even to other fiat currencies.
Yes.
When you have these centralized systems, and you have to go beyond that existing trusted relationship.
Yes. Okay. When I was debating Peter Schiff, this was like probably the crux of my argument.
Whereas with gold, and this is really any real world assets, even if you put something like a blockchain on top of it, it's still tied to where's the actual custodian held, what is the legal chain that works there.
The Oracle problem, right?
Yeah, and like for example, and people often say, well, why can't you make like a gold-backed crypto? And it's like, well, they've existed for years. There are gold stable coins. There's a market demand for them. It's not very big, but it exists. And I can imagine, for example, if you want to, have access to gold, but you're in an environment where it's hard to get physical gold, you can't get the gold ETF, you can at least get this, semi-trusted chain of custody to hold that gap for you, but it's all within the same price of Bitcoin. And they didn't quite crack the decentralization problem, which Satoshi ended up doing with the difficulty adjustment, which continues to be kind of an underrated aspect. They added a fairly straightforward control loop to make this system work. And basically what that does, it takes Fedwire. So Fedwire is this foundational ledger that banks tie into. And it basically says, well, we can have something like that, but we can have it open source and backed by proof of work, and no single entity is in charge of it. And it's got fixed units instead of arbitrary units. And that's now a competition that exists. I think another way of putting it is it makes trust optional, because even with something like Bitcoin, there are still scaling issues that sometimes custody solves. But for example, if you have $1,000 spending wallet versus a $100,000 like life savings wallet, you have two different security requirements for those types of things. And sometimes you want the speed and convenience.
Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Support the channel by liking this video, subscribing, and enabling post notifications for more content on crypto and digital assets. Check out our other videos and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps with the YouTube algorithm and keeps the content coming. Thanks for your support. Enjoy the video.